What's up, my friends? How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Carpo's Thoughts from inside my car. It's just the only really quiet spot. It's kind of rainy out today, but I thought I would hide in here. You know, when the summer comes around, I'll be stoked to make videos in my house again. Or, out in my backyard again with my garden and everything. It just adds a certain, ambiance, especially when I'm out in the woods, making videos in my cave back there isn't exactly the greatest thing. But anyhow, I took some notes today. Actually, over the last couple days, I had to transfer them because I didn't want to forget anything here. And they're nothing really, nothing too deep or anything. They're just notes about life. The particular subject that I wanted to cover, of course, was going to be about, covers a wide variety of subjects, but having to do with the world that we're living in right now and what age are we really in. I was going to start by mentioning the Magna Carta. Now, the Magna Carta was considered the Magna Carta Liberatium, or Liberatium, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It was a document which was considered like one of the most famous constitutions or agreements, and it's a complicated law or set of rules or a paper that was adapted. It's kind of like our own constitution here in the U.S., but it was amended over time in Europe in 1215 A.D. So, it was like 800 years ago. And it was considered the document that the whole idea was to separate people from divine rule, to allow people to have a say and not be ruled just by kings. It didn't mean that we were eliminating kings altogether or ruling class. It meant it allowed a government by persuasion, is what they call it. Which means that you have to persuade the people that you're worthy to lead rather than just ruling because you rule. And this doesn't mean that it changed the system in play. It didn't mean that all of a sudden everyone had rights or anything like that. But it was a step in the right direction to where people could start to feel like they had, some sort of an impact. A lot of papers have been drafted up over history, but how many have really survived and are still talked about the way the Magna Carta is? And what it got me thinking about was these cycles that we live in. And the phoenix would be the metaphor or the symbol for, I guess, the video that I'm making here. Because the phoenix is the representative of cycles, but also mainly rebirth, because rebirth is the key. The phoenix rising from the ashes symbolizes that idea that no matter how crazy things get, there's always a rebirth into something. And the perspective of what we think it's worth or how good we think it is compared to today, for example, comparing the fall of ancient Rome to the world we live in today, the age of decadence, if you will, which I actually took a couple of notes and I'll get to that. What we have in today's world is what I heard defined by someone as a smug security of achievement, which means that we really believe that we have achieved something great and that nobody can tell us any different, that we think that since we've worked so hard... Hold on a second. I'll come get you when I'm done. Kids. He knows I'm out here making a video and taking 5 minutes, so he's running around with ice cream on his face like a madman. Anyhow, they called it the smug security of achievement, which meant that we believe that in today's world we actually have something that's greater than ever in the past. We believe that we're working towards a goal that's worthwhile, if you will. And society reflects this belief that we've, when I have a discussion with someone who's, let's say, an industrialist type mentality, or someone who believes in progress through manufacturing, through jobs, progress through growing and building more and more companies, just continuing to grow as a species. And I say, well, to what end are we going here? Or are you just talking about some personal gain in the short term where you can feel satisfied? And nobody, everyone thinks it through on their own terms. People are not stupid. Which is a completely separate video I wanted to make as well. The people are not stupid. People do stupid things. People are stupid about things. When we think that the general population is stupid, that's ridiculous. Each person is only stupid about certain things, and guaranteed that no matter what kind of person, no matter how stupid you think someone is, they know more about something than you do. And the question becomes, what's worth being smart about? And that's subjective. You may think, well, this person can't even read. You'd think, but are they happy? So if you can read and you're unhappy, are they better off being happy and not being able to read? That's subjective. In the big picture, that it's a complicated question. But the Age of Enlightenment was what they called, the period between 1685 and 1815. It was only a 130-year period. And during that time, why they called it the Age of Enlightenment was because what we might call the Age of Reason, if you will, where people started, science developed. We had several people involved. There was Francis Bacon, there was Hobbes, Descartes, Kepler, Galileo, John Locke, several authors and scientists, Newton, Voltaire. All these people came around that time. And between science and writing, mathematics, geometry, we learned so much about our world. And we got pretty cocksure about it. When science became, some people, when you hear of Francis Bacon and Descartes, they were considered sometimes, well, I'll save that for a totally different video. Some people would say one's the founder of Freemasonry, other would say the founder of, certain types of symbolic thinking. None of them were really the founders of anything. They were just people who had carried on some of these ancient traditions, and they'd studied, Egyptian mathematics and geometry and customs and beliefs, and saw that all these messages were encoded in the past, but they were making all these new discoveries to understand the world. And we became pretty cocksure about that. And after that, it led to the Age of Romanticism. And this is funny because the Age of Reason, and then we have the Age of Romanticism. And they call it that because the Romantic period was what they would call between like 17 and 1800, or 1750 and 1800. It can vary, I guess. When the actual, the authors were coming out with all these very, spiritual type works, etheric subjects. And what I see when I feel like people had tried to rely on reason far too much to understand their world, and the Age of Romanticism was kind of a response to that. People said, well, reason isn't making us happier. All this knowledge is great, but how is it making us happier? And so we started falling back into these storylines and books. Now, this is a very general view, but I'm just trying to, that's how I, try to picture it. Because before we could get too far into the Age of Romanticism, the Age of Industry came. And the Age of Industry is, you might call the Age of Romanticism the Age of Feeling. And the Age of Industry took all of that away. Feeling was eliminated. We needed to keep the classes organized so we could keep the slave labor going and make sure that the machines ran so we could build. And that brought us to where we are today. So we went into the Age of Industry and progress, or what you might call progress. Now, this is where I wrote down a couple notes here about this. After the Age of Industry, we often lead to what we call the Age of Excess, or the Age of Decadence, which is, in my eyes, as we become more knowledgeable, the internet has sped up our knowledge pretty quickly. Just a couple of decades, through the 70s and say 80s and 90s, being the Age of Decadence and Excess, where people hadn't quite figured out that progress isn't leading towards anything. It's just increasing the population so we ever have more people to deal with and to feed. And we're not answering any real questions. It's just like we're blindly pushing ahead. After that comes the age of confusion, and I believe we're living in that right now. The age of confusion where the internet, let's say, has sped up the amount of information that we can each get, and it just becomes too much. We become overwhelmed and we kind of shut down. Well, somewhere after this, in the future, is going to come the age of chaos, the age of rebirth. But within that, I think, hopefully before, will be the age of reflection. If we can have an age of reflection, which we may be leading into, where we can really look at the world and ask ourselves, what do we want? And if we can accomplish this as a whole before we get to the age of chaos, which may be too late already, then maybe we won't have to have a rebirth, but we can just have kind of a restructuring of the world that we already live in. I like to think of us as new navigators of the mind, but not new, rather just navigators of the mind. The people who are the philosophers, the philanthropists, the people who care. There's people who are suspicious of anyone who has any clout or anybody pays attention to them. They think, well, if they're famous, they must not be, they must be somehow deluded or involved in a conspiracy, or if they're giving money away, philanthropy. There are people giving away billions of dollars to good causes, and people just suspect them and say, well, they must want something out of it. We have to forget, or we have to get rid of that thinking and forget about this notion that everyone is in it for themselves. In the long run, we're all in it for ourselves because we're all living with ourselves and we want to do the best thing. But that shouldn't change the fact that people are doing great things to try to change the world. So if we view it as a negative place, as a horrible place, as a greedy, selfish place, then that's the reality that we as individuals are going to live in. And if that's perhaps a reality I've lived in for parts of my life, after I'd been wronged, I'd been ripped off, people had stolen from me, I'd trusted people and been wronged. The system screwed me over twice for, having cannabis, something I considered legal. I understand what it's like to be screwed by the system, to be mistreated by people, and to be hated for absolutely no reason. I know what it's like to grow up in school with the acne and being picked on and not really having any friends, but never to let any of that shit get to me in the long run. That I'm a happy person now, and I'm living in an age of confusion. Oh, Phil Collins. I guess he already had it, didn't he? Who knows where we're going to go next, but, the phoenix will rise again, regardless, one way or another. If there's only one thing I could add, that we use our minds over our hearts too much today. And I was one of those people, and I've always been a rational thinking person who says we should always think with our minds first if we can. But we've found out that, no matter how much rational thinking we do, there are certain things that have to be answered by our hearts. And some of those are difficult to distinguish. It's become a weakness in some people's eyes if you think with your heart. They say, no, you can't. Your feelings aren't valid. Well, your feelings are valid if they're based on intellect and if they're based on reason. If you're a reasonable person, you have good insight, then your subconscious can make connections that you can't quite voice. And this may be something as simple as saying, I believe that the universe is conscious and I dare not try to explain it. Or that there is a bigger picture to it. It reminds me of that quote, which goes a million ways, but I posted it the other day. In a nutshell, several people have said it, but that small minds talk about people, average minds talk about things, and great minds talk about ideas. And once you've gone to a higher level of thinking, then you're oh so bored with the lower levels. If you're a person who thinks of ideas and you get into a conversation with somebody who talks about people, it could be the most frustrating thing ever. People who are obsessed about looks, about status, about so-and-so, and then when you have a conversation and you tell people how you feel, that this is petty to me, then you're considered arrogant, you're considered pious, and this is how people who are thinkers end up separating themselves from society. And I'm making this point to say, if you're a deep thinker, realize that some people are in kind of a layman way of thinking and, scoffing at them or insulting them for not being a thinker is no way to go about it. And also, if you're a person who's not very wise in certain areas, don't scoff and blow people, push them away because they're too smart for you, or just say, oh yeah, you geniuses, because there are a lot of very smart people, and there are a lot of very dumb people, and we're all stupid about different things. And I'm proud to call myself an average person, I'm not a super intellectual. I may be a little more philosophical than a lot of people I know, but, there's only one thing, is there's a price for individuality. And as I heard someone say, the price for individuality in the past could have been death, beheading, crucifixion. But the price for individuality today is an empty pocketbook, bankruptcy, not being a productive member of society in their eyes. In other words, a person could be a wonderful thinking philosopher, person who wants to live with the best values they can, never wrong anyone, always do business legitimately, and nice guys finish last. And that's what they mean. If you're always trying to live with your best values and you're not willing to go out and be business oriented and, go get them, and there's no place for philosophers in today's world. And that's unfortunate, because I think we need them more than ever. It's as if thoughts aren't worthy of income, and that makes sense. I see a future of crowdfunding philosophers and crowdfunding thinkers and science projects and all these things, as we're already doing. And I think it's just a wonderful thing. We're willing to give a lot of money to people who, don't have anything to contribute to society, because we want to buy a $500 purse because it has a name attached to it. Or because we want to go to some exotic vacation to a place, and because we deserve it, and spend all this money on these cruises and whatever it might be for us. It's a very subjective thing, definitely. We've got to live, we've got to do what we can. It's just unfortunate that we all get caught up in this age that we're in, this world that we're in right now. It's very confusing, and there's nowhere for a person to wander off into the woods and just kind of live on their own. So instead of being frustrated about it, we have to acclimate to it and incorporate into it. And that is the root of the word integrity. That's what integrity means. It's not about how great your morals are. Integrity is about how well do you fit in. That's what integrating is. So hopefully we all have enough of it to make life worth living. I'm working on it. I think we all are. So namaste, my friends, and I'll talk to you soon.